I've always loved the dreamy look of my photos, those beautiful glowing highlights, and that overall just glow and minimalistic vibe. Over the years, I've refined my technique in what I do to get those images. I'm going to show you a technique in Lightroom, as well as a more advanced technique in Photoshop to get the most out of your photos. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I'm going to be showing you how to download some actions and some presets to speed up this workflow immensely. Now, the first technique I'm going to be talking about is in Lightroom, and it's essentially a technique I apply to every image. It just gives that little subtle glow to an image, as well as pulling back some of the digital sharpness that can be on your image, just to make it look a little bit more pleasing, a little bit more minimalistic, should you say. So I've already edited this image up here, so I've done all my adjustments that I want to do. Essentially, what we do is we go to this clarity and dehaze section in the present section of Lightroom, and we just pull back the clarity a little bit. So that adds just a little bit of glow. You can kind of see when I pull it back. If you pull it too far, it looks crazy bad, but anywhere from like 30, 20-ish area looks really good. And then a little bit on the dehaze as well. Now the dehaze is a little bit more intense, so I wouldn't go too hard with the dehaze. Mainly more clarity than dehaze, but a little bit of dehaze can always help as well. Now, when you apply this effect, it is going to change the contrast of your image. So I do recommend either going to the contrast slider or better yet, the tone curve, and just adjust the tone curve a little bit just to get some of your contrast back while retaining that glow that we've added. So I'm just going to adjust this here till I'm happy with it. And I'll probably pull a little bit more out of the highlights here. Cool, so I'm pretty happy with how that's looking now. Now to further this technique, that was a global adjustment. I will often go in and adjust certain areas with masks. Now, especially when you've got the sun or any sort of side lighting, it's very nice to enhance that with a bit of a glow as well. So in this example, I'll do a radial gradient, but you can also do like a linear gradient from your source and that sort of thing. And I'll do the same thing. I'll just pull a bit of clarity and dehaze out of it, just to give it a little bit more glow on that area. And then just a little bit of contrast, just to balance that a little bit there. And I might add a little bit extra warmth and a slight bit of extra exposure there, just to give that sort of glowy feeling from the highlights there. Sometimes that can look a little bit unnatural too, especially if you've got some shadows near your highlights. So it's always a good idea to intersect that mask with a luminance range. So that means that you can just limit the effect to the brightest highlights, for example. So in the luminance range, click O on your keyboard, it'll show what you've got selected, and just drag it so it's just the highlights that are being affected. And you can shift this around a little bit, just to make sure that you're just getting the highlights, and anything that's a little bit darker and in shadow isn't as affected. Just makes it look a little bit better. And just to show you, you can use it in more situations than just like a straight sunrise. Here's a photo I took recently from a camping trip where I've got this cow in front of my car, and I haven't gone too hard on the global dehaze and clarity. I've only done 10, but I've really gone a little bit more intense in the masking. So in this top mask here, which I'll show you on and off, I've just added a bit of glow from the sunlight. So I've gone a little bit higher on the exposure, only a tiny bit warmer, and then I've gone and given that clarity and dehaze just to add a little bit of glow. And in the opposite corner, I've just taken a little bit out. So I've taken just a little bit of exposure out, a little bit more contrast, just to sort of balance the image out a little bit. It just shows you can go from just like a very plain basic image to adding a bit of glow, adding just that little bit of extra pop and interest to your image via this effect. Now, the second effect I'm going to talk about is a little bit more complicated. It's in Photoshop as opposed to Lightroom, but it gives you more of a glow and it gives you a bit more control over the glow, and it's a bit more in your face as opposed to your clarity and your dehaze. It's a lot more intense of a glow, but I do love it, especially for my really good images. So I'm going to give you an example on this image here, which I shot at a concert semi-recently. So I'm going to edit it in Photoshop. I've already done my edits in Lightroom, and I'm going to go into it in Photoshop. Now, importantly, before you apply this effect, we need to go in and we need to do anything that we want to do in Photoshop before we want to apply the effect. So for me, getting rid of any distractions is sort of the top priority. So I'm just going to quickly get rid of this phone here and probably this fan over here. And I'm just going to generate fill that out. So just first step, always get rid of any distractions in the image. Awesome. So that's looking good there. All right. So once you've done whatever you want to do in Photoshop, so for me, it was distraction removal, but you might have contrast or effects that you're applying. We want to stamp the image. So we want to get a snapshot of the current image as it stands with all the layers above it. So we're going to go select on the top layer, and we're going to go Shift, Option, Command E on Mac. I believe on Windows it'll be Shift, Control, Alt E, but I'll leave a correction here if it's not. And that just creates a stamp of your image. So all the effects under it, this is the current image as it stands. I'm going to get you to name that glow so that we know that that's the glow layer. Next we've got to do is we've got to apply a blur to this layer. So we're going to go filter, blur, and then Gaussian blur. Now, generally best practice is you'll set the radius to whatever megapixels your camera is. So if you're a 24 megapixel camera, you'll choose 24, and so on. Now that's not a hard and fast rule. Have a play with it. Personally, I use a 61 megapixel camera and I sort of live around the 34, 48-ish area, but it's just personal preference because this is the amount of glow that you're going to actually be applying. So for this image, I'm just going to do 30 and then we'll press OK. And then your image is going to look horrible, but don't worry about that. We go down here to the blending mode and we're going to set that to screen. So you can already see there's quite an intense glow already happening on this layer. There's still some more steps to make sure we refine this. So down here, we're going to apply an adjustment. So we're going to go to the curves adjustment. And most importantly, once your curves adjustment pops up, we need to pin it to only the glow layer. So it only affects the glow layer. You can do that by clicking this button here, and then you'll see this icon appear that points down a layer to the glow layer. That's just saying this effect is only applying to that layer. So in your curves, we're just going to create an S curve. So higher up on there, further down there, and you can already see that it is adjusting the way that glow is affecting the image. So anything that's brighter is getting more of a glow, and anything that's darker that you're pulling down is getting less of that effect. So have a play with this curve until you're kind of happy with how it's sitting. So I'm kind of happy around there-ish. So I'm just going to deselect. So before, after, just adds a little bit of contrast and control of where that blur is. Now, personally, I like to take this one step further and get even more control. Now, generally when I do a glow like this, so this is called an Orton glow, I will eliminate the subject of the image from the glow effect. So the way we can do this is select your glow layer, and we're going to apply a layer mask. So we click this button down here, and essentially it's going to create a mask here. So the mask, anything that is white will be transparent through the mask. Anything that is black, so we can paint using the brush tool black on the area, that's going to hide the effect. So I'm going to press B to get the brush tool up, and I'm going to be on a straight black effect there. And I'm going to set my opacity and flow a little bit lower, so sort of around 50-ish%. And I'm just going to come in here, and I'm just going to start painting on the performer there. And just nice and subtly, it just applies, it just gets rid of the glow onto the performer. And take your time with this. You want to make sure it's nice and solid. So just go through and paint your subject. So I'm just going to do a really rough job here just to sort of illustrate the effect. But now you can see, so I'm going to apply and unapply that layer mask. So this is with the layer mask and this is without the layer mask. So you can see that it really provides a bit of contrast and a point of focus in the image to the performer there. Now, even this, for me, the glow is a bit too much. So in the opacity and the fill section, we'll just adjust that down just to get it to be a little bit more subtle. So I find that your fill generally affects your highlights areas first, whereas your opacity affects the whole thing. So I generally find sort of around 30 to 50, it depends on the image, gives you that effect that you're looking for. So that's on 54%. And then if I show you just the original that we started with, and then the current state of the image, you can see that there is that subtle bit of glow and it just provides a little bit extra. Now, same as before, it will affect your overall contrast levels, but not as much as in the Lightroom technique. So I do generally like to add a little curve that isn't pinned, so it's affecting the whole image, and just have a play just to make sure that my contrast level is sitting good at where I would like it. So I'll just adjust this here, just because the contrast is slightly changed with it. It's not as global as previously, but it is nice just to add a little bit more contrast back to the image. And that's my two favorite techniques for getting your glow effects to any image whatsoever. But for some people, that's going to be too much of a process and they're not going to do it, especially if you're going through hundreds of images and you're editing them and trying to apply this effect. That can take a while doing all that manually. So I'm going to give you guys a download link. I'm going to delete all these effects. I'm going to give you a download link to some actions I've created that just do it all for you. So when you press play, essentially it asks you what your blur level you want is, and it will apply everything and chuck you in the image ready with a layer mask, ready to brush to provide a bit more contrast to your subject. And if that's too much of a hassle for you and you don't even want to brush out your subject, I've got an action with an auto mask in it. So you can just press play on that, set your blur level, and it will use Photoshop's AI detection to try to find the subject and eliminate the effect on the subject. I'm going to leave those two download links in the description. It's going to be part of a big pack. And also in that pack, I'm going to give you guys some Lightroom brush effects for this effect so that you can just quickly add a glow to a sunrise or a bit of light, for example. So it's nice and quick and you don't have to faff about with controlling everything manually if you so please. And if you're interested in how this image came to be, you should check out this video here where I talk about a camera that should be in every photographer's pocket, and I took this photo specifically on that camera. Anyway, I'll catch you in that video and I'll talk to you later.